Well, folks, Hearthstone's newest expansion has been revealed. And as was teased earlier in the year, we are indeed headed back to Goro, which I know is going to be really exciting. A lot of people, I think, remember Goro as their favorite era of Hearthstone, perhaps myself included. So we've got some familiar faces, as you can see here with Elise. We've got the return of quests. Not like Stormwind, but like the old school Goro quest where you get like a big 5-mana 8/8, which looks pretty cool. So lots to talk about in this video. Lots of new mechanics like this custom location for Elise, and lots of legendaries, some new keyword actions. So all in all, let's just go ahead and hop into things here with Elise the Navigator. She is a 4-mana 3/5 battle cry. If your deck started with 10 cards of different costs, craft a custom location. So this is just going to be like kind of Kazakus before crafting that custom potion or a golem. But in this case, it's going to be a location. We'll talk about all the details here in a second. But regarding this condition of having 10 cards of different costs, you know, your first instinct might be, oh, you know, like running a 1 through 10 cost card. That might work. But do keep in mind, you know, there are 0 cost cards in the mix. And we have stuff like, you know, Ceaseless Expanse that costs, what is it, 125 now. So there may be ways with like giants or cost reducing cards that go above 10 to reduce that. So you don't have to run like strictly 1 through 10s, which might help you kind of functionally lower your curve a little bit, where you don't have to squeeze in like 10 drops or 9 drops, maybe peak out at something like 8 with a 0 cost card and a ceaseless or something and still get your release done. So that does help maybe fit this into more mid-rangey decks as opposed to like exclusively control decks. That said, you know, I don't think aggro decks will be able to afford this very often. They're often, you know, capping out at like 5 mana. There just won't be enough unique costs there to get Elise active. That said, you know, we're seeing a handful of mid-range decks finding success. So stuff like Paladin running Ursul or whatever could easily squeeze in an Elise, I think, and make that work. Now, when it comes to the location, you're going to do just like we said before, you know, choose between a 1, 5, and 10 cost option, just like those potions and golems. And I guess Ignis as well with weapons. We've had a few of these. Now we hit locations. They're each going to have a different set of scaling options to choose from, and you're going to pick 2. So for instance, here are the 7 choices for the 1 cost location. You're going to pick 2 of these choices, and each time you hit your location, you're going to activate 2 of these things. Do note all 3 locations have 3 durability. That does not change across locations. So for instance, you pick a 1 cost on Goro Jungle, you can pick summon a 2/1 Raptor with Rush and gain 3 armor. And that means, you know, on that first turn, you're going to immediately get a Raptor and armor. Location turns off, of course, comes back after another turn. You get another 2/1 Raptor, you gain 3 armor. So in total, you'd gain like 9 armor, summon 3 2/1 Raptors with Rush over those sort of 5 turns with those 2 gap turns in the middle, which does add up to admittedly like quite a bit of stuff. Just keep in mind, it is on a notable delay. And of course has a little bit of a mana investment because, you know, Elise, you're kind of spending 4 to almost do nothing. You're not usually very excited about playing 3/5s these days. So, you know, it takes a while to kind of return the tempo here that you're sacrificing. But the 7 abilities in total are Raptor with Rush. Your next spell has spell damage, gain some armor, give your character's attack, which that does include your hero as well, discover a spell and it's discounted, Death Rattle, deal damage to all enemies, and then summon a copy of a friendly minion. Do keep in mind the Death Rattle one there, of course, only goes off at the end after you've hit the button 3 times. So you're not getting that 3 times, just 1 total time. Those are each going to scale up. So here are the 5 cost versions. Now you're going to summon 3 Raptors. Your next spell is going to have +2 spell damage. You're going to gain 6 armor. You're going to give your characters +2 attack. Your spell is going to cost 4 less after you discover it. The Death Rattle is now going to deal 5 to all enemies. Again, a reminder that does hit face as well. And you're now going to summon a 5/5 copy instead of a 1/1 copy. And then finally, the 10 cost versions are going to get you 6 Raptors with Rush. That's like old school Scale of Onyxia almost. Your next spell has spell damage +4, which is insane. Gain 12 armor. That's insane. Remember, that's like 36 total over the 3 durability. Snapping Plants give your characters +4 attack. Now you're going to discover a spell that costs 7 less. Your Death Rattle is going to deal 10 to all enemies. That's straight up usually a board clear and some big time face damage. Pyroblast face, and summon a 10/10 copy of a friendly minion. Those are all like pretty crazy effects, particularly when you multiply each of them by 3. That's like 3 board clears with nesting grounds. You know, that's like 36 armor. That is some 3 10/10 copies of crazy things potentially. But I will say, you know, that 10 mana one is a big investment because, you know, you're spending 4, you're adding the 10 cost card to hand, you're playing that. It is, you know, ultimately much of it's delayed because, again, it takes kind of, you know, 5 total turns to get to the end, basically, of that 3 durability. So that is a super, super, super slow sort of commitment at 10. I think it's going to be pretty rare to see 10 cost location, only if you, like, you know, find Elise super late and you're just like digging for crazy value in a grindy, you know, control mirror or something. 10 might happen. I think the sweet spot is 5 because it happens really naturally on curve. You play Elise on 4, you play the 5 cost location on curve on 5, and, you know, you're getting some pretty good stuff potentially. Like 3 Raptors will still allow you to like recover some tempo, clear up the board a little bit. You know, discovering a spell that costs 4 less is a pretty good middle ground because you'll often find a lot of things that cost 3 or 4 you can use right away. Whereas when you look at like the 10 cost version, a 7 cost discount on a spell isn't really all that likely to hit because you're going to sometimes just discover 3 things that cost like 1, 2, and 3 anyway, and you might be wasting a lot of that discount. So for a variety of reasons, I think the 5 cost version feels like the sweet spot from a curve standpoint, but also just like the return on the value of these is worth it as well. That said, I think in a pinch, sometimes people will also pick 1 cost options because you just like desperately need a quick 3 armor. Like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Like, I just have to do something. Or like, I just, you know, I want to play other things. So I'm just going to weave in this cheap location. And it still feels like it's worth it. But you're not like over committing too much, you know, and you're still getting that like, you know, value over those 3 turns eventually for your location. So I do think 1 and 5 feel good. I do think there are some decks that make sense for Elise. You know, it's definitely going to be one that you have to focus on a little bit when building your deck. And not everybody's going to appreciate it from like a curve or game plan standpoint. So not a like played everywhere, you know, not one of those legendaries that pops up in every list, obviously, but I still think a strong option for slightly slower mid-range decks and control decks as well can really find a good spot for Elise. So I think this card will absolutely see some play. All right, so next up here, another legendary Umbra is back. This is Endbringer Umbra, 7 mana, 6/6 this time around. Battle Cry. Trigger the death rattles of 5 friendly minions that died this game. Which this could be a pretty explosive sort of thing. You know, when we're looking at like 7 cost cards like this, you usually want them to have a really big, really immediate, really explosive sort of effect. And I think this does satisfy that condition because, you know, there are a lot of death rattles that you can bake into your deck that, you know, might be great at clearing a board, might just be great at dealing a ton of face damage. I was looking at like stuff that's in the pool right now, like, you know, Tyrannosaurus, like, okay, man, deal 7 to face potentially. Testing Dummy, this can deal 8, split across everybody, so that can deal a lot of face damage. Now, I was also looking at value stuff like Yasandre, for instance. You know, repeating Yasandre effect could be a pretty cool way to build a board. And, you know, like 2 of those were warrior cards, so we're already like building a death rattle warrior deck with this as a pretty significant payoff. Also keep in mind, I guess we've got like, you know, shutter block stuff where you could trigger this battle cry multiple times. Now, I do think that they have to be 5 distinct minions, probably based on effects like this we've seen in the past. So I don't think you can just like have one awesome death rattle and copy it 5 times and expect Umbra to pull that off 5 times. I think you'll want to build a deck that's running a handful of different death rattles. But I suspect there are going to be at least a few decks that are able to find a successful path with this. Number one, I think they'll probably print one in this expansion that's like already built in to support Umbra. But number 2, I think we've already got a lot of cards that kind of feel like they are living in that space where this is maybe not even necessarily like a win condition or the like ultimate combo finisher or something, but it's just like, oh, I have a lot of dragons with death rattles. I'm just going to use an Umbra here to like pay off all those awesome death rattles and just like give me, you know, a nice little bonus card here that's just going to like clear a board or do face damage, like we said, or generate a ton of value, or maybe it's going to do all 3, right? There are instances we're going to do all those things. So this becomes this just really nice mid to late game sort of bomb that does whatever your deck wants it to do. And I'm sure we'll find a handful of different decks that find some silly stuff to do with this. I was thinking about like hand buff Death Knight could just like, this could result in like some crazy hand buffs. We had like good dragon stuff in Warrior. there's like starship pieces, you know, like a bunch of different starships that have like cool death rattles. This wouldn't actually give you the starship pieces back, but you know, if you're already running a starship deck that already have a bunch of death rattles that are cool, maybe you just use this for some bonus basically to pay off that synergy that's kind of already in there and baked into your deck. So I haven't like mapped out a specific list for this just yet or anything, but I can see so many worlds where this finds a ton of success. I think the cost is just right. I think the immediacy is just right. This card looks like a very promising, high potential sort of card to me, and I don't think we'll have even seen everything that's designed for it. I'm sure there's going to be some stuff that pays this off even bigger throughout the reveal season for this set. Moving on here to our first new quest. This is Spirit of the Mountain for Shaman. Of course, a 1-mana legendary spell. This is going to start in hand as a quest. The quest this time is to play 7 minions of unique types. So like a menagerie shaman style deck. Your reward is Ashelon, which is a 5-mana 8/8 elemental beast with battle cry, adapt twice, and then for the rest of the game, give minions you play those adaptations. Now, if you're like me and you've kind of forgot what was in the adapt pool, well, I pulled it up. You get Divine Shield, +3 attack, Death Rattle, summon 2 1/1 plants, Wind Fury, Elusive Taunt, +1/+1, +3 health, stealth until your next turn, and poisonous. So for instance, you know, you could give every minion you play throughout the rest of the game Divine Shield and Death Rattle, summon 2 1/1 plants, right? That could be like a crazy sticky kind of board, and maybe you run some Bloodlust style cards and you're just like, ah, you're gonna die to Bloodlust. Or alternatively, maybe you give everything Wind Fury and stealth, and every minion you play throughout the rest of the game just always gets Wind Fury and stealth, and it becomes a nightmare for your opponent because you know you're eventually just going to Wind Fury them to death with all your hidden Wind Fury cards, right? And there are definitely some cool combinations and some pretty sick payoffs that are possible. As far as consistency is concerned, I think it's going to be hard to get like super reliable results. There is a pool of like 10 options. So, you know, you're not always going to get offered Wind Fury. You're not always going to get offered stealth. But I think there are probably enough that are like aligned with a game plan. You know, specifically, I think you'll probably want like a more aggressive game plan, in particular if you're like playing a bunch of minions really fast. So things that are like +3 attack and Wind Fury and, you know, even stealth or elusive might help you stabilize boards, that sort of thing. Things that like play into the fact that you're playing minions. You probably hit things in that alignment consistently, just maybe not the like super high rolls. Now, you know, all that said, I do actually have some hesitations for this card, but it really comes more in line with the kind of quest conditions here. Playing 7 minions of unique types. I think there's a deck building challenge there. Like getting 7 types is actually a lot. We've seen stuff like Menagerie Jug and Menagerie decks working pretty well in this meta, like multiple tier 1 lists running that sort of package, but they're not usually running 7 types. It's usually like 3 or 4 types that fit into some other sort of cohesive game plan or package, you know. It's not just Menagerie for Menagerie's sake. I think getting to 7 is harder than you think, but then also just drawing into those 7 could also be a challenge. Maybe we'll see some actual Menagerie cards coming along, you know, the all type cards, amalgams basically, where, you know, playing any one of those will start to check off each next one on the list. But I also confirmed with Blizzard that, like, for instance, if you play an elemental beast, that doesn't count as 2. It's still just going to pick one of those and count that one. Apparently it's like smart so that if you play another elemental beast, it'll always choose the new one, but ultimately you're still getting 1 type per 1 minion, so you're not going to be able to accelerate it with dual types. That said, you know, with the amalgam sort of thing, it'll just always make sure you're checking off the next one on the list so that you don't have to find the specifics like, oh god, I desperately need a Murloc, I can't find a Murloc. Well, amalgams will just always end up being your Murloc in that scenario if you're running enough amalgams. So maybe there's something with like an amalgam Menagerie list that makes this feel easier to achieve than what it currently looks like, because I think right now it would be tough to build a deck for this, and I think it'd be tough to find them all on time without some of those key amalgam hits. And then I'm still not totally sure that Ashelon's really all that good of a payoff, because it's still, you know, ultimately a 5-mana 8/8, which sounds kind of big, but I don't think you're usually playing this on turn 5. Like 7 minions by turn 4, realistically, and you're playing this on turn 1. That's just not going to happen, right? That's turn 2, 3, and 4. You've got to play the stuff. This is going to come down on like turn 7 or 8. And then, you know, at the end of the day, it's still just a minion-based reward. If the opponent hasn't already killed you with their combo, then, you know, they're a control deck who's going to have tons of removal and value, and are your adaptations going to keep up? So ultimately, what I'm saying is I'm not buying it here for Spirit of the Mountain. I think it's cool. I love that Adapt is coming back. A lot about this to like from a fun standpoint. I just think from a power level standpoint, I think this has a lot of challenges to overcome, and I don't currently see it happening. Even if we do get some new Amalgam specific support for Shaman, I'm not convinced this is the reward it needs. So speaking of Shaman cards, we do have a couple other ones here that aren't exactly Amalgams. Might help a little. This is Volcanic Thrasher, a 3-mana 2/3 with Battlecry, draw a fire spell, and Kindred, which is a new keyword for this expansion. Kindred means if you played a card last turn that shares an either minion type or spell school, then you will activate this Kindred bonus. So for instance here, if you played either an elemental or a beast last turn, kind of like with the elemental effect, then you're going to get spell damage +2 on your fire spell. So this is, you know, a multi-type minion, but I don't think this is necessarily one you'd want to run in a minion-y deck for your Spirit of the Mountain. I think this is actually just a more like generically and uniquely good card outside of that package, because this is a ultimately 3-mana 2/3 tutored draw that also has this potential, you know, enormous upside of spell damage +2. That can be really, really good on AoEs in particular. We do have some fire options in Shaman already with like the Volcano card, you know, that deals 10 with lifesteal. This could just boost that up to 12, get a little bit of extra healing or board clear output, but any kind of damage spell or you know, wide board AoE really scales super nicely with this. But I don't even necessarily think you need the spell damage to feel good about this card. I think sometimes you're happy to play this just for a 3-mana 2/3 with this specific draw. So this card actually looks really good in and of itself. Maybe not necessarily a card I see as a good fit for the quest, but just great card. Hey, what do you know? Speaking of fire spells, this is Lava Flow, new 3-mana fire spell. It deals 2 damage to the lowest health enemy 3 times. Wait a minute. With spell damage +2? Are you kidding me? That now deals 4 damage to the lowest health enemy 3 times, which is 12 damage total. This scales insanely well with spell damage +2. This is like a ridiculous pair of cards. And keep in mind, you know, this can go face if you've, you know, cleared the board and left the opponent alone, or if you've just chipped them down enough that they are the lowest health enemy. They have only 13 health stuff on board. You play Lava Flow, this will kill them if it has that spell damage. So this looks like a really cool card, actually. I think this is quite good. The fact that it's lowest health enemy, I think, really helps in regards to finding good targets to play this removal spell as needed. You know, this can really help you ping the right sort of stuff, like we've seen sort of with leeches in Death Knight. You know, this is sometimes in a pinch a desperation removal card, especially even dealing 4. It's kind of good, you know, clear out 3 4/4s with this as well. It could be super nice. It's not necessarily as random as some other options we've seen. So deadly combination, but I think also kind of a card that's solid in its own right anyway. The overload's a little bit unfortunate, but when you need to use this, you're not going to feel too bad about the overload. And if you're killing the opponent, of course, you won't care at all. So I like that this has that mix of lethality, that spell damage scaling, and some board clear potential as well. That seems like enough stuff to make this really good. And when you hit this combo, which you can force too, theoretically, right? This could be the only fire spell in your deck to guarantee you hit it as long as you haven't already drawn it. That becomes a really scary combination. So pretty sick stuff here for the Fire Shaman package. Now moving on to our next quest here, we have Death Knight. This is Reanimate the Terror. It is double blood and single unholy. Quest to spend 18 corpses. Your reward is Tyrax Bone Terror. He is, again, a 5-mana 8/8, this time an undead beast with Death Rattle. Open Terror's Grave. It has Death Rattle, resummon Tyrax. You can see there the Terror's Grave also has deal 4 damage when you activate it, which can go face, hit minions, 2 durability, and again, Death Rattle, resummon Tyrax Bone Terror. So that becomes a loop here where you know, they have to deal with Tyrax. As soon as Tyrax is gone, they have to deal with Terror's Grave. As soon as Terror's Grave is gone, they have to deal with Tyrax. You get the idea, right? So it is infinite damage because you get 4 damage over and over and over again, which like that's actually not irrelevant, right? Like that 4 damage chipping off every other turn, assuming, you know, it's not silenced or whatever, dealt with in some other way, actually does become kind of meaningful sometimes in like grindy long-term matchups. Not to mention, you know, just the 8/8 repeating over and over and over again might not be as annoying sometimes, but still will chip stuff down on that endless value at some level. So between the two, it does become kind of awkward for the opponent. Just keep in mind that it's all on a pretty big delay. Especially like, you know, if they're not killing off the Tyrax immediately, but even if they are, you know, it's every other turn for the Terror's Grave. So there are going to be some gaps, basically. It is going to be a slow, grindy sort of reward. Not to mention, I think it's going to take a while often to spend the 18 corpses. That's not an easy task either. It's going to be a late game scenario where this hits. And, you know, just to get enough corpses, number one, you have to run a deck that's running enough bodies. Sometimes those tend to lean a little more aggressively because you're just running a lot of low cost minions to help achieve that. Then you got to have the cards to spin the corpses as well. So there's like a little bit of a deck juggling happening here too, where I need to be kind of aggressive to get corpses. I need to be kind of good at spinning the corpses. How do I land in the middle of that scenario? Not to mention juggling, you know, double blood isn't always the easiest to run a ton of bodies, although we've certainly seen double blood finding success lately in other ways. So it's just like, you know, piecing all that together is not easy. And then it's so delayed for your reward to again be this delayed. That makes me nervous, man. Like, when is your Tyrax actually going to be hitting the board? Like turn 10, turn 12? I think that's definitely going to be the case sometimes. So when is the Terror's Grave really going to pay off? Turn 15, turn 18? You know, like how long does it take for that 4 damage to chip away enough to be enough value, or that repeating 8/8 to be enough value? Have you already gotten to the stage where the opponent is just slamming 20/20s off Kill Jaden, you know? I don't know. Maybe I'm underestimating the speed at which you can spend 18 corpses, but I don't feel like I am. I think that's going to take a while. Like when we look at corpse spending cards in Death Knight, right? There are definitely like some cheaper ones that can go fast, but again, it just doesn't add up to that much. Like 2 corpses, 3 corpses, 2 corpses. It takes a while. Like this guy's pretty good at 5 corpses, but again, remember, you got to get the 5 corpses too. There's 2 sides to this equation. So stuff like Falric definitely could help, right? Gain twice as many corpses as normal. That could help speed you up a little bit. Maybe if we get more cards like this that directly contribute to this game plan, I could still see it happening a little faster. But ultimately, you know, it's tough. Maybe this is where Volcaros comes in, right? Maybe you don't run any other corpse cards. You just play a bunch of quick... never mind, you can't. He's double unholy. Just kidding. You can't run Volcaros and reanimate. Do you see what I mean, right? Like every little time I start thinking about this, you run into all these little headaches. Hey, look, more corpse cards you can't play, right? Like there's just... Oh, you can't play Falric either! He's double unholy! This is what I mean, right? Like it's so hard to actually piece all this together and for the reward to be this slow. I'm sorry to say, I think again, this quest, I don't see it coming together, man. I think it's going to take too long and we just have better late game grindy options than this already. So for me, yeah, I think it's just too punishing to get it together and too slow once you do. So here we have a corpse spending card. So here we have another card for that night. This one does play into it, but, well, let's talk about it. It's 3 mana. It's Paleomancy. It allows you to discover an undead and then spend 5 corpses to keep all 3 of those undead instead, which, you know, 5 corpses for 3 mana, spending that's kind of cool. Again, though, remember, you got to get the corpses, so we're going to need some cards in Death Knight that give us corpses really easy and really cheap for any of this to feel reasonable. That said, man, spending 3 mana to discover an undead is slow. That's not discovering an undead to summon. It's just discovering it. It's just adding it to hand. And keeping all 3, not really that great of a reward. Like, yeah, it's value, but remember, the great thing about Discover is that you pick the good one and you leave the crappy ones. Rarely are you going to be excited to keep the crappy ones. It's just going to be this like pile of random stuff that's not that good. Like Undead helps narrow it a little bit, sure, but you're still gonna have a bunch of cards that are hard to play, that you don't want to spend mana on, that are stuck in hand, that aren't maybe contributing all that well to your corpse pile. So ultimately, like 3 mana is just a really high overhead to pay for this sort of effect. I think this card is very, very bad. And although it's like technically an enabler for the quest, running this is just gonna make your deck so much worse. All right, so moving on over to Priest here, we have a pair of 4 mana spells that are both using that Kindred keyword. Up first is Grave Dawn Void Bulb, a 4 mana shadow spell. Summons a random 4-cost minion and gives it taunt. And then if you have Kindred, you do it again. So in this case, Kindred would be if you cast a shadow spell last turn, then now you get to summon 2 random 4-cost minions. Definitely got to get 2 out of this for it to feel remotely good. Summoning 1 is just absolute utter garbage because, you know, the average 4-drop is not even necessarily like 4/4 in stats. You'll sometimes hit like 2/2s with battle cries and stuff where it's just an absolutely totally awful tempo play. Even if you do get 4/4s, honestly, it's still a pretty awful tempo play to just like summon a random medium-sized body with taunt that's not doing anything else. So you almost have to have Kindred to even bring this card up to like okay, and I don't even really think it's very good if you do hit both, because ultimately you're still sometimes going to get, you know, a 3/3 and a 2/2 and a 3/3 and a 4/4, and that's just, even with taunt, not that great of a tempo development. Decks just go so much faster, and if you're trying to be aggressive with this, they can be much more aggressive than that, and if you're trying to be defensive with this doesn't really seem like that great of a defensive option either, even though they have taunt. Just not enough stats in play to keep up with all the aggressive boards out there. So ultimately, like, the floor on this card is like utter garbage. Sometimes if you don't have that Kindred, just one of the worst cards you've ever seen. The ceiling on this card is like okay, and that is not to me a good recipe for success, because like you don't want to run a card that's okay at best and half the time just absolute utter garbage. So I don't really see this getting there, even if you like have a dedicated Shadow Priest deck that's hitting the Kindred reliably. Maybe this is like at the bottom of your deck as card 30, but I don't even know. I feel like you could find better than this. So that said, let's go ahead and look at the other one here, Grave Dawn Sunbloom this time. This is on the holy side, 4 mana spell. Draw 2 cards, and Kindred, this costs 2 less. So, 4 mana, draw 2, again, not good. The floor on this is pretty bad. We have so much cheaper, more efficient card draw. I will say, like, if you're in a slower deck and you're desperate, sometimes spending 4 is okay. I will also say, like, off the imbue hero power, sometimes this could be great. This will be like 0 mana, draw 2. So this is one of those cards that existing is relevant, but the floor on it from a deck construction standpoint, I'd say a little higher than this one. You might take this sometimes off the imbue hero power as well, but I still don't think you're like insanely happy about it. It's probably still not going to feel like a high roll. But again, that doesn't make the card good because we're checking whether or not it gets run in decks, right? Like, I don't think this gets run in decks. This is a slightly higher chance to get run in decks. When you've kindreded this, which means you've played a holy spell the previous turn, drawing 2 for 2 is okay. Like, that's solid. Again, it's not insane though. Like, it could arguably be 1 maybe. I will also say holy is probably a little bit easier to build towards. Historically, I suspect there are more holy spells for priest. Maybe playing this in a slower deck. Holy spells tend to be more about healing or removal and those sorts of things. Shadow tends to be more aggressive. That's not always 1-to-1, but on average. So maybe that all pieces together a little bit. So I have a bit more hope for this card than the previous one, but I still think it looks a little clunky sometimes. Still feels pretty bad if you didn't hit that Kindred. So it might require a rather focused deck list in order to achieve this, and even in those best case scenarios, it's still just kind of solid, not outstanding. All right, so moving on over to Hunter here, we have a couple cards. Up first is a story card. It sounds like there might be a little cycle of these that kind of harken back to the original Unguro quest. This is the story of Karnassa. Karnassa Brood Queen was the reward for the original Hunter quest. This one is a 2 mana spell. It shuffles 10 1-cost 3/2 raptors into your deck with Battle Cry, draw a card, which is basically I think slightly smaller version of Karnassa Brood Queen's text. In that case, you had to do the quest, play the 5 mana card, and then you got the broods into your deck. In this case, you just get them right away for only 2 mana, which is it's crazy the kind of acceleration of power there over the last however many years, 6, 7, 8 years, whatever, since Goro. So pretty nuts. I actually do kind of think this is sort of good too. It's not really a big ask for only 2 mana, and you're basically putting, I think, 10 pretty interesting cards in your deck. Like just slamming down a 1 mana 3/2 that cycles helps you kind of fill in a lot of gaps, helps you keep things moving, helps you keep bodies on board. Could feel like this kind of really nice, overwhelming, aggressive swarm over the course of a game. Just, you know, an extra 3/2 here, an extra 3/2 there, sort of starts to chip in. And if you're playing a deck that leans into that and can pay off some aggressive boards, as Hunter historically has been able to do pretty well, then this makes sense for me. I will say, you know, in those kind of decks, you don't often want to give up like a turn 2. So maybe this is something you weave in more on like a turn 4 or a turn 5 and kind of try to use this to nudge your way through that mid to late game scenario with a couple extra 1/2s on board. But ultimately, I think there's enough here that this becomes a viable option for hunters who want to play board-based minion-wide strategies. Moving on here to the Ravasaur Matriarch. This is a 4-mana 5/4 beast with Kindred, which means if you played a beast last turn, which, you know, of course, if you have a bunch of 1/2 beasts into your deck, that could be a great setup here for the Kindred. This deals damage to an enemy minion equal to this minion's attack. So another attack scaler here, which at a base would be, you know, kind of a 4-mana 5/4 that deals 5, maybe takes a little swing on board. But keep in mind with stuff like Imbue as well, you know, this could be something you make really cheap and continue to scale that attack, and suddenly, you know, it's dealing 8 or 10 damage and can be a 0 cost card that clears up an 8/8 or whatever is a possibility. I don't know. I mean, you know, with Imbue Hunter, of course, we're so used to like hit the button, win the game with King Plush until it got nerfed, that a lot of these other Imbue strategies seem kind of underwhelming in comparison. You know, it's like, oh, okay, well, only getting to clear up a mid-sized enemy minion, like normally I might think that's okay, but in comparison it's like, yeah, is that really that good? And then in a baseline here too, like this is, again, it's solid, but for some reason I'm not like super excited about it. I guess if you're just running a bunch of beasts and chaining them out and really jostling for board in the mid game, like this is a pretty solid threat to get down. But I don't think this is like crazy game defining kind of swing or anything. I think this is just a solid option for that kind of deck. I'm assuming the Kindred here is ultimately a pretty easy thing to achieve, so I'm not like holding this conditionality against this card. I think you're going to complete that 99% of the time if you're playing this in a deck. Your deck's going to do that well. So ultimately not a real risk. I think just maybe not really the most exciting payoff necessarily either, or the like best synergy plugin when you think about things like Imbue. So just a solid, you know, middle of the road sort of option. Moving on to Rogue here, we have the Cultist Map, a 2-mana shadow spell. It discovers a card from your deck, and then if you play it this turn, also pick one of the others. So basically here, a way to kind of tracking something out of your deck. And then if it's, you know, cheap enough to play immediately, then you kind of get to track a second card out of your deck. So basically a draw 2 when played with some discover upside. That actually seems great in a rogue deck that is running cheap enough stuff to reliably play and get that second choice, right? That actually looks pretty great. And just finding the thing you need right now. Often, you know, maybe that's a shadow step of preparation where you're just almost guaranteed to be able to play it right away as long as you want to, and getting another card out of the deck as well. Again, it's not as good of a choice the second time around, right? But it's still ultimately a choice from something of your deck. So getting the 2 best cards out of 3 choices still feels pretty good. So I could absolutely see this fitting into tons of little shuffly style rogue decks that are just spamming a million cards, as rogues always want to do, by the way. This looks like a really good fit in those scenarios. So this is like great rogue card to me. Moving on to some neutral cards here, we have the Questing Assistant, a 2-mana 3/2. If you played a quest this game, deal 2 damage. So this is a pretty natural like turn 2 follow-up sort of option. If you play your quest on 1, maybe helps you recover just a little bit of that tempo you sacrificed on turn 1 for a more minion-based deck. You know, clean up your opponent's 2/2 or 3/2 or whatever after playing your quest. I think this might work its way into some minion-based quest strategies. I think there'll be plenty of others, though, that just abandon this. Like, they just don't really need it. You know, like, no, I've got a plan. I got other things I want to do. Like, look at that shaman, for instance. Like, this doesn't have any minion types. So it's like, well, maybe it's not going to make the cut in Shaman. So maybe it gets into like 1 or 2 quest decks, but the rest abandon it. So I don't think an outstanding option. If this like drew a card or something, it'd probably be a much better bet. I think we had an example of that with previous quest style synergy cards. So just okay. So moving on to the Blob of Tar here. This is a cool new Tar card. A 4-mana 2/4 elemental. This has Poisonous and Taunt at a baseline. And then it has a Death Rattle. Summon a 1/2 with Poisonous and a 1/2 with Taunt, which this is a pile of stuff. I actually think this card's going to be kind of good. It just does so many annoying things that, it's just really sticky, really frustrating, really problematic. Like enough taunts here that like, it's a defensive weapon against aggressive decks. And the fact that they have Poisonous as well means like even like 3/3s that would normally, or 4/4s or whatever that would normally trade into this fine. Yeah, Poisonous takes care of those, right? So it's gonna deal with some annoying, awkward early boards because you've got like 3 bodies here that are gonna take basically 3 trades in many cases. I guess the 1/2 with Taunt often will just kind of get ran over, but at least it's a little speed bump, while the 2 Poisonous cards do actually chip away at the board. Big Stuff has a really hard problem with this. It's like, oh god, I got an 8/8. I just can't get through all this stupid stuff. It's like, okay, I used a rush card to clean up the first half, but now I gotta run my 8/8 into a 1/2, and then the Poisonous is still left behind to clean it up later. So it's just, I see all these super high friction kind of scenarios where 4 is just cheap enough to run this. I think some control decks will weave this in and create some awkward problems for people. Don't sleep on this just because it's a neutral card. It's doing a lot of different stuff and a lot of annoying stuff. That tends to work well. Moving on to the Tortolan Storyteller. This is a 2-mana 1/2. With at the end of your turn, give +1/+1 to each friendly minion of a different type. So we have here some more menagerie support. This time with a cheap 2-cost card. Play this down, probably in the mid game after you've maybe hopefully stuck a couple minion typed minions and get some buffs out of this. I'm having a hard time with this a little bit when I just compare it to stuff like Menagerie Jug as the big Menagerie payoff right now. That's often like deal 9 extra damage right now. And I'm like, man, yes, it's a 5-cost card, obviously, but I think that one hits that perfect sweet spot of like, okay, I've had time to kind of get the board there. This is coming down and it's punishing. This card is more about like in that middle space where, I don't want to play this necessarily after I've already gotten the board down into the mid game. I want to play Menagerie Jug, right? You kind of want to almost play this one a little bit earlier to kind of help get the board to that Menagerie Jug, but then you're sort of sacrificing because this does not have minion types. This isn't a particularly compelling minion in its own right. It might make your board a little bit easier to deal with in some ways because you've sacrificed, a good 2-drop and played a 1/2 instead, and maybe you're only hitting one thing right now, or kind of setting up to hit 2 things in the future. So I do wonder if this falls in a little bit of an awkward gap where it's like you're not really playing this on turn 2, or you may be playing this on like turn 4. Where does this actually live where it feels best? How many minions do you need for this to feel like a meaningful payoff? I think you need to have kind of 2 things on board right away for this to feel worth it. So is it going to be worth that, or would you just rather run more minion type things with quality effects, quality battle cries in their own right, as opposed to kind of pivoting away to this? So I think it's probably okay. Maybe you just need enough options that this still makes the cut. But I don't think this is the most exciting card in your deck in those scenarios. Moving on here to the Dissolving Ooze. This is a 3-mana 3/3 with Battle Cry. Destroy a friendly minion. Spit out the bones of its attack and health into your hand. And Bones appears to be a 2-mana spell. I think looks like it's maybe always 2 mana. I don't know that it scales with the minion's cost or anything. And then that's going to allow you to give a minion, whatever those stats are. So, +1/+1, +10/+10. Volcaros could be +30/+30, which is actually kind of crazy when you think about charge minions. You could eat something really big and then just store this buff up to put on your Leroy or whatever and smack opponents in the face with like a surprisingly gigantic buff. You know, I will say you got to get to that scenario. You got to get to a scenario where you've got a Volcaros down on board and you've managed to play a Dissolving Ooze. That's not an easy world, but you know, I could see almost like a hand buff deck or something that's like buffed up a mid-sized thing, or even maybe like a giant that gets really discounted. Use that giant just as a like pass through to get those stats onto the thing that you really care about. There might be some cool scenarios where that's possible. The 3-mana tax on this is not too high that you know can't weave together a few of those cards in a single turn. And you know, sacrificing the minion sometimes will be bad, but if there's like awesome death rattles too, that might be something you want to do anyway. Like, hey, I'm going to activate my death rattle, I'm going to make sure this thing dies before the opponent like poofs it or polymorphs it or whatever, and still get some upside on the bones as well. I think that's kind of cool, man. I could see a few different lines for this card creating some scary moments. That is assuming that the bones do indeed stay at 2 cost. If they scale with the minions cost, I think it becomes a lot harder to use this. But the image we were given was with the 2 cost bones saying 0/0. They didn't say like 2/2 or whatever. So if it's fixed cost, it's pretty exciting, man. Like that's actually got a lot of potential. So then our final card here actually has some epic artwork, dude. This looks cool. It's the Ancient Terror Dax, a 4-mana 4/4 beast with Battlecry. Choose to gain stealth until your next turn, elusive, or Wind Fury, which is kind of like 3 adapt options, but not actually adapting, which is interesting. So basically you got 3 choices here. You only get one of them. I don't think that's good enough, remotely good enough, frankly. Like, none of those are that exciting. Wind Fury, like, who cares? It's just gonna die. Elusive, who cares? It's still just gonna die to minions or rush or whatever. And stealth is till your next turn, like, kind of interesting, but why, right? And like the flexibility here is they're not that distinct of options that, you know, like, oh, I'm going to adjust to the game state. Well, no, it's just they're not that distinct or interesting that you'd need to. So ultimately, this just looks like an absolute throwaway, terrible, not good sort of minion. If you could choose multiples, maybe you'd be more interested in that, but you're not going to use like a shutter block or something to do that. So I don't know, dude. Like, even if you give like adapt to this from the adapt shaman thing, there's still not enough combinations I'm excited about, I don't think. So yeah, ultimately, I think this just falls way short. All right, so all that said, those are the day 1 reveals. So let's go ahead and rate each of these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Elise the Navigator is a 4-star card. Endbringer Umbra is a 5-star card. Spirit of the Mountain is a 3-star card. Volcanic Thrasher is a 4-star card. Lava Flow is a 4-star card. Reanimate the Terror is a 2-star card. Paleomancy is a 1-star card. Grave Dawn Void Bulb is a 2-star card. Grave Dawn Sunbloom is a 3-star card. Story of Carnassa is a 4-star card. Ravasor Matriarch is a 3-star card. Cultist Map is a 4-star card. Questing Assistant is a 3-star card. Blob of Tar is a 4-star card. Tortolan Storyteller is a 3-star card. Dissolving Ooze is a 4-star card. Ancient Terror Dax is a 1-star card. And there you go, folks. That is the Lost City of Unguro. I'm definitely feeling nostalgia vibes with cards that literally reference old Unguro stuff, some familiar characters, some familiar places in the artwork. Like, this looks like the place from the old Priest quest, like Awaken the Makers or something, as I remember. Instead of awakening the Makers, we're reanimating the Terror. Horrifying, but, you know, volcanoes, turtles, elementals, dinosaurs, the vibes are there, and that makes me pretty excited. So yeah, stay tuned. I'm sure there are lots more card reviews to come, lots more cards to discuss. Share your thoughts on all these down in the comments below. Thanks as always for watching, and until next time, game on.